So you found the goat.
The Rings of Power is Amazon's attempt at a prequel to The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and there's just so much wasted money and potential in this show. The seasons and 8 episodes are so short that they barely get any use out of the props. The whole episode is mostly a long siege battle, so at least it wasn't boring, but there's just so much wrong with it. It spared the usual problems of switching storylines 15 times an episode, but it's still dogged by problems. They cleared up one problem, which I appreciated, and while doing it, made about 20 or 30 more. The writing and direction is so clunky and designed to create emotional moments, even if they made no logical sense. The orcs had set siege to the elven city of Eregion last episode, because the Dark Lord Sauron was inside. And they wanted to get him before he could create magic rings and enslave them all. Sauron, the Lord of all evil and deceiver, brought the orcs here for some unknown plan, and now the orcs are demolishing the city with trebuchets that they got from somewhere off camera. The city that Sauron is currently in and needs for his plan. Towers are falling all over the city, and the elven foundry that Sauron desperately needs is in a tower, and it's just dumb luck for him it isn't destroyed, or a giant rock doesn't fall on him. The elves and the spies the show has told us they have did not notice this giant orc army surrounding their city while beating drums, and the orcs just sneaked up to their walls carrying burning torches with stealth trebuchets and a hill troll. What the show calls trebuchets aren't exactly trebuchets either. Trebuchets are supposed to have a sling at the end of the arm, and theirs don't, so the range demonstrated is probably massively over what it really would be. The orcs' plan also makes very little sense, just like Sauron's. The orcs bombard the city, and despite the orcs' main objective being to breach the walls, get inside and get Sauron, they never use the not trebuchets for the main purpose of a trebuchet, which is to breach walls. The orcs' plan is terrible. The orcs instead use the trebuchets to bring down a mountain in order to dam a river, and once again the writing is hampered by the writers and directors not seemingly knowing how anything works. The idea that a river could be dammed so easily that these chunks of rock would fill and create a permanent dam so watertight that the river would be completely dry is just laughable, and even if they did, the water level would just rise behind the dam until it flowed over the top or around it. I would have accepted the orcs going upstream and making a dam, maybe dam up the end of a valley upstream. I would have accepted redirecting the river. I can't accept this. This is rubbish. This is not how either rivers or water work. The river is stopped altogether for near a full day because the writers wanted a dramatic moment of the trebuchets throwing rocks and bringing down a mountain, what appears to be several kilometres away. Now, based on historical designs, trebuchets stood at around 18 metres tall and threw missiles, typically 37 kilograms or 80 pounds up to 300 metres. This rock that they're showing, ballpark I'd estimate that's a few tons unless it's hollow or made of styrofoam. So the orcs, not trebuchets, are throwing rocks that are ballpark 4,000 pounds instead of maybe 80, up to 3 kilometres instead of 300 metres. So in the spirit of season 1 of The Rings of Power, where they fit thousands of horses onto ships that would generously fit 20, the makers' maths yet again appear to be off by a factor of about a 500. So that's what you get from The Rings of Power. They either do almost nothing and it's really boring, or they do something and it's stupid and ludicrous, like Galadriel taking an exploding volcano to the face that destroys the entire town around her, sets people on fire, but she walks away without a scratch on her. Pick your poison. The river dries up instantly and permanently, and the orcs then launch an infantry assault on foot across a wet riverbed, on which the river could start reflowing at any moment, and they would probably just sink into the silt and mud while the elves pelted them with arrows. But oh no, for some reason the orcs just walk right up to the wall and the elven archers are just standing there doing nothing. And have the people that made this never walked on a wet riverbed or in mud? Never mind tried to run over it. The orcs would be slipping over every few metres, and it gets worse because the orcs then drag a massive wheeled siege engine the size of a tank slowly across the silty riverbed, and it'd just sink into the silt. And secondly, it's designed to rip a hole very slowly in a stone wall. It has to be right next to the wall, so the defenders can throw rocks and put arrows in you. And we'll find out later that the orcs even built it with an exploding cauldron attachment, which seems to serve no purpose other than to cause the war machine to explode, like a daisy cutter if fire gets near it. The elven smith, Midania, then exclaims, "They have a ravager," like it's supposed to mean something to the audience. The show has never introduced a ravager before, and I have no idea how she even knows what one is. People just know things in this episode, and I have no idea how most of the time. Somehow the orcs know the exact thinnest part of the wall to attack. They just know. That part of the wall, we will find out later, is definitely not 10 feet thick, as the Elven King claimed in an earlier episode.
A region is protected by 2 rivers with miles of curtain wall of dwarven stone, 10 foot thick. Rest assured, Celebrimbor and the secrets of his craft are safe.
The wall, in fact, gets thicker in between shots. In this shot, it looks about 3 foot thick. In this shot, it looks about 10. And even then, a river won't just drain unless there's a slope on it. Realistically, the river would just start flowing again within about half an hour and wash the orc army away. And that's if the dam held, which it wouldn't. And it's not like the trebuchets wouldn't work on the wall, because apparently orcs with hammers can damage it. The elves' army has also just teleported about 1,000 miles from the west off camera to come and fight the orcs, despite the Elven King saying just last episode, "We can't fight both the orcs and Sauron." So in this episode, off camera, he's decided that he's just going to take the Elven army and fight both the orcs and Sauron. And as is traditional for the Rings of Power, the CGI frankly doesn't look good at all for a show of this budget. It strongly appears they just did a really bad CGI of the Elrond actor's face. And why? You have the actor! Meanwhile, Sauron is inside the city trying to finish the rings, while trebuchet shots are falling around him, and just nobody's plans make any sense in this. Sauron just comes out and declares himself to be the military leader of the city, instead of Celebrimbor. And why was Celebrimbor ever the military leader of the city? Are the elves that dim? He's not even a military leader, he's a blacksmith! I don't know. Why do the elves even accept Sauron taking command? I don't know that either. He seems to control everyone now, and it just happened off camera. The elves' army is coming from the west with the Elven King. And who's leading them? Well, it's not the king. They also have 3 generals that the show has told us exist in a previous episode. 3 apart from Galadriel, who got herself captured attacking the orc army alone for reasons. The writers wanted her to get captured, so they wrote her doing something idiotic in order to make it happen. And it's none of the other 3 generals that are commanding the army either. It's instead Elrond, the scribe and poet. I hate this show. So the elves have 2 military forces, one's being led by a poet and one by a blacksmith. This is despite the king stripping Galadriel of command because he feared she'd been corrupted by Sauron. Elrond has also been around Sauron, and the king just gave him command of the entire elven army. And this is Elrond, who ignored a direct order from the king in the first episode of this season and jumped off a cliff with the rings. Make any of this make sense? The elven cavalry charges the orcs, but stops when the orcs threaten the life of the captive Galadriel, and the elves stop their cavalry charge. And Adar, the leader of the orcs, says, "Welcome, Commander Elrond." And once again, how does he know? Have these 2 characters met before? Because the show has never demonstrated that. How does he know Elrond's rank? He just does. And then the scene cuts, and off camera, Elrond and one of the other elves has gone back with Adar to the orc encampment, and this may be the worst scene in the entire episode. There's frankly a lot of competition though. Adar wants Elrond to give him one of the 3 elven rings, because with that and the crown of Morgoth, he thinks he can get rid of Sauron forever somehow, and maybe there's scope to make a deal here for the elves. Elrond could say, "Okay, stop attacking the city, I'll talk to the elves inside, get them to open the gates for us, and we can go in together and get Sauron. After that, maybe we can go our separate ways." Adar asks to see the ring, and Elrond tells him it would be pretty foolish to bring it with him. And later it turns out that It seems Elrond had it round his neck the entire time and probably did take it with him. And frankly, it was incredibly foolish to come here at all. The orcs could just take you captive as well. Galadriel tries to talk, and Adar instructs an orc to cut her tongue out if she tries to talk again. So the orc puts a knife to her throat, because orcs are bloody useless. Sorry there, champ, he gave you one job, and that was to aim a knife at Galadriel's tongue, and somehow you still missed. Adar then explains to Elrond that all of the elves in Eregion are under Sauron's control, and once again I have no idea how he knows that. Then Adar says, Celebrimbor himself let Sauron in, and yeah, he did. I know that, the audience should know that if they've seen the previous episodes, but how does Adar know that? Characters in the Rings of Power just know things that they should have no way of knowing, and instead of trading the ring for Galadriel, Elrond tells the orcs he's going to attack them, and then leaves, and for some reason the orcs let him. Why, I have absolutely no idea. They could capture the leader of the opposing army without a fight, and the show has already demonstrated that the orcs have no basis of honour. So the loss of the entire elven army is Elrond's fault for refusing to make a deal and being bloodthirsty. I have genuinely started to think the people making this show hate The Lord of the Rings. They say they love it, and then when they make something based around Lord of the Rings, they do a character assassination on one beloved legacy character after another. Elrond then says goodbye to Galadriel, kisses her, which is a bit awkward because she's supposed to be married with a full-grown daughter at this point in the timeline. A daughter who Elrond will later marry. So, while getting off with his future mother-in-law, he passes her a lockpick so she can free herself later. The show makes a habit of forgetting who is supposed to be related to who, like Celebrimbor talking about the smith Feanor all the time in a way that's quite weird, considering Feanor was his granddad, or the Elven King Gil-galad giving wisdom to Galadriel when she's thousands of years old and was the sister of one of his grandparents. Not even a joke. Her brother Angrod was supposedly his grandfather. But they wanted to make Galadriel a younger, inexperienced version of the character, who was a mere 3,000 years old in the Rings of Power, instead of the experienced 4,500-year-old mature woman in the Peter Jackson films. Then most idiotic of all, on the way out, the elves, Elrond and the guy with him, are loudly discussing their battle plan in Elvish and how the elf with Elrond should go and tell the dwarves to flank the orc army, when Adar, the leader of the orcs, can speak Elvish and will understand if he hears them. This episode seemingly can't go 5 minutes without doing something indescribably stupid. The elves then charge, and nobody really uses any tactics in the entire of this battle. The elven cavalry just charges into orc infantry in woodland and immediately gets surrounded. Then they lose all of their horses, and from then on the battle has all the intricacy and nuance of two 9-year-old boys having a pretend sword fight with sticks. During the battle, one of the diversity elves is trying to get through the orc lines over open ground in order to reach the Ravager siege engine before it breaches the walls, and she's fine for the exact amount of time that she needs to be. Then when the writers decide it's no longer time for her to be alive, this happens. And wait, what? Were there 6 to 8 orcs just sitting off camera in a semicircle, all aiming at her saying, wait for it, it's not quite time yet, don't loose on any of the other many elves that we can see either, just that one, all on that one. I don't like her, and all loose at once, now. She's about to blow up the siege engine by firing a fire arrow into the exploding cauldron attachment that seems to serve no other purpose than to make the siege engine explode. Not sure why the orcs even added that, really. Depending on what the plot needs, the orcs are either crack shots or stormtroopers in terms of accuracy. A night has fallen by this time, and the orc siege machine is still working on that wall, and the show is seriously telling me that none of the elves standing on top of that wall thought to set fire to this very flammable wooden siege weapon with an inexplicably exploding cauldron on the back of it. What have they been doing all this time? They must have been stood there for nearly 12 hours, watching that thing chip away at their wall. Oh yeah, that's what they were doing. I hate this show, and I know why they did this. I think it was to try and create an emotional moment again, and they needed an explosion, I guess, to make this seem a little bit more like Helms Deep from the Peter Jackson films. And I've thought about why this series fails, because it's trying to be like the Peter Jackson films, and they've copied a lot of elements from them. There are hobbits, there are elves, there's magic and dwarves, and there are battles, and the best thing I can liken this to is a car. It doesn't matter if you have all of the exact correct pieces of the car. If you put the wheels where the wing mirrors are supposed to be, the car won't run. It isn't good enough to have all of the pieces. They need to be in the right order and doing the correct jobs. The loss of the Chinese diversity elf doesn't land at all, because she never got a character in the first place. The elf that was with Elrond then goes to the dwarves to ask for help. The Dwarven King refuses to help, and is instead going to dig for gold because the ring has driven him mad. So Prince Durin has to leave the mine that him and Captain Hey-Ho have been guarding, and the absolute state of Captain Hey-Ho. Sophia Non-Vete is a substantial amount of woman.
Ah, Owl's beard. Enough with the quail sauce. Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
Prince Durin organises the dwarves who've noticed the king's behaviour and is about to leave with the dwarven army to go and help the elves when the king starts digging in the demon-filled mine, has cut down all of the guards, off camera of course. We just get told it's happened. So the prince takes the whole dwarven army to go and confront the king instead. Off camera of course, in order to protect their home in the mountain so they can stay safely in their houses, presumably now surrounded by orcs and built on top of a giant fire demon. Great plan. So yet again, Thursday night rolled around and I made some of my friends watch The Rings of Power with me. Afterwards, one of them said, quote, "Friends don't make friends watch The Rings of Power." One of them quite liked it though. The series is not without people who really like it, and I've had some criticism this last week from someone who said the script for The Rings of Power is amazing, because in their view it's way more faithful to the source material than the Peter Jackson films, where they'd replace the character Glorfindel in one scene of the movies with Liv Tyler playing Éowyn. And is The Rings of Power really more faithful? Really? Because the series has multiple plot threads happening at the same time. In one it has the Rings of Power being made, and in another it has the adventures of the character Isildur. And if this timeline is to be believed, that has the slight problem that the rings were made over 1600 years before Isildur was even born. Galadriel is supposed to have a husband and a full-grown daughter at this point in the timeline, and not a young daughter either. The daughter is supposed to be around 1300 years old. I also got requests for more footage of the actress Sophia Non-Vete from The Rings of Power, and also her fine work on the UK children's TV show Swashbuckle, so I'll try and work those in for you throughout the video. You're welcome.
Oh, go on then. 1, 2.
Yay! Oh, Captain, I love it already!
And I have some serious questions about the realism in that clip of Swashbuckle, because Captain Hey-Ho has a guitar, but for some reason the noise coming appears to be a fiddle. 0 out of 10 Swashbuckle, 0 out of 10. That's why I say Sophia Non-Vete is surprisingly okay in The Rings of Power, because watching her in Swashbuckle, it could have been so much worse.
I am so hungry for my seafood a la slurp. Is it ready yet, cook?
I'm just about to start making it.
And if you think she's bad in The Rings of Power, just try Swashbuckle. She's practically intolerable.
Milk! Keep the jug still. Look, not a drop spilled. Oops.
This doesn't look right.
Turn that frown upside down. Only a clown would chuck in everything he found.
And this episode is kind of like Swashbuckle, a lofty and refined vision that is undermined by silly mistakes. The more I see of Sauron's master plan, the less sense it makes. Nobody's actions in this episode make any sense. A lot of the time, the physics don't even make sense. The idea that this 200-pound, human-sized elf could bowl over this giant monstrosity of a hill troll that must weigh tons is just laughable. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor is living in an illusion created by Sauron in his tower in Eregion, and is still trying to make the 9 rings for man. And he doesn't even notice the siege until later in the episode, when he throws a hammer through a window and the scales fall from his eyes and he sees the truth. The tower and forge have been badly damaged by the siege, and there's debris all over the floor. And how would this illusion even work? Have you seen the size of the lumps of rock on the floor? He'd be stubbing his toe on fallen masonry and tripping over every couple of steps. But at least they cleared up where Sauron got the mithril from after the dwarves refused him last episode. He didn't. He used an illusion on Celebrimbor, who instead forged the rings for man using black Sauron goo. And once again I have no idea what the story's even supposed to be. What was Sauron's plan? If he was going to use his goo to make the rings, why did he go to the dwarves to ask for mithril? Was his plan to use mithril first, and then when he found out that he couldn't, he just gave Celebrimbor goo instead and hope it worked? Why did he need Celebrimbor and the Elven Forge at all, if he could make magic rings using silver and his goo? Just none of this makes sense. It's now canon that Sauron bleeds black goo, by the way, which is a bit awkward considering all the times in Season 1 where Sauron ended up bleeding before they thought of him bleeding black goo, and his blood was clearly red. Just none of this makes sense. Why do the wizards turn into moths? They showed Sauron bleeding red blood multiple times last season, not black. Granted, in this episode he created an illusion to make his blood look red, but is the show seriously trying to tell me that he was doing that last season while he was passed out? Is that it? Or did the show writers just forget what they did last season, or just not really care? This show gives me a headache, and recently I had a suspicion that the actor Ciarán Hinds in the show, playing Dark Wizard, was supposed to be the character Saruman, who was played by the great Christopher Lee in the Jackson films, and everyone has kind of been going on the assumption that this character, the Stranger, was Gandalf, and this, I think, would be really destructive to the later Peter Jackson story. You can't have Saruman turn evil, have Gandalf forget about it somehow, and then turn evil again later. But thinking about it the other day, it occurs to me that the Rings of Power is never explicitly stated that the Stranger was Gandalf, just that he's an Ishtar, an angelic spirit in the form of a wizard. So they could do something even dumber than my first suggestion, like making Dark Wizard Gandalf and the kindly stranger Saruman. And as likely as that seems, why would they character assassinate Gandalf? Well, why did they character assassinate Galadriel by making her a war criminal? Why did they character assassinate Elrond in this episode? I can think of no good options for who the Stranger and the Dark Wizard could be, because there are not many Ishtar to choose from. There are 5, and again according to the timeline, they're not supposed to arrive in Middle-earth for, let's see now, about 3,000 more years. I speculated to a friend while watching this that one of the wizards, as far as we know, could be the character Radagast, and he said, "Who?" I told him, "You'll remember in a moment when I explain. He was in the Hobbit movies being played by Sylvester McCoy. He was covered in bird droppings and had a rabbit-drawn sled." And he replied, "Oh no, F that guy." The least bad option is maybe that both the Stranger and Dark Wizard are the Blue Wizards. That would maybe be the least damaging to the story and timeline. This show has a habit of dropping in terms from the books and never properly explaining them, like Valar, Silmarils, Ishtar, which is the exact same mistake Witcher Blood Origin made. The weird part is how often completely different shows are making exactly the same writing mistakes. So at the end of the battle, the dwarves don't show up, Galadriel sneaks into Eregion, Celebrimbor escapes with the 9 rings for men that he finished for reasons. The rings are now indestructible, which just raises the question of how you'd even work with indestructible metal. No idea, it's all magic, I guess. Celebrimbor takes the rings to Galadriel, who's escaped from the orcs and infiltrated the city. Celebrimbor then takes a group of elves to confront Sauron, and Sauron just makes them all stab each other. It's all a farce. The elves find time to be stupid yet again before the end, because there are a handful left with their backs against the city wall. And do they do the sensible thing, which for me, seeing as they're massively outnumbered, would be, maybe you could climb the ladders onto the wall behind you and fight from there. You can pull up the ladders behind you. No, instead, they charge the orcs and lose, and Arondir the elf tries to fight Adar and gets 2 swords through the chest for his trouble. And if that's the end of Arondir, it will be one of the most useless character arcs I've ever seen. 2 seasons with this guy, and he still barely has a character. Adar then lets Elrond live for reasons, takes the ring from around his neck, and the orcs break the city wall and storm the city. At least this one wasn't boring, but I hate this show.
Best friend's a welly. I love to eat jelly. I'm the captain of the Scarlet Squid.
Her best friend's a welly. She loves to eat jelly. She's the captain of the Scarlet Squid.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.